very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Here we are getting you your weekly dose of major international news with a perspective. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. After 4 years of strained ties, US-Pakistan agreed to resume stalled strategic dialogue. World Panorama takes a closer look at Kerry's Pakistan visit. Middle East peace talks resume after 3 years in Washington amid deep skepticism. Secretary of State John Kerry sets 9-month goal. Bangladesh's Islamist party Jamaat-e-Islami declared illegal. The party is also banned from taking part in 2014 elections. Jamaat challenges the verdict. And in sports, Indian Formula One Grand Prix hits a speed breaker. F1 boss Ecclestone drops India from 2014 calendar. And to the story in focus this week, the United States and Pakistan are pledging to resume a high-level strategic dialogue on security issues. The pledge came as US Secretary of State John Kerry met with senior Pakistani officials in Islamabad to discuss a range of security, regional and bilateral issues. The resumption of the strategic dialogue indicates that the relationship between the two countries has improved since the low points that we've seen in the past. But there's still significant tension and mistrust between the two nations, especially regarding US drone strikes and Pakistan's alleged ties with Taliban militants using its territory to launch cross-border attacks against American troops in Afghanistan. Now, one way to look at this development is a new government in Pakistan and a new Secretary of State in Washington. This factor, it seems, increased chances that the two sides can settle their grievances, something both hope to gain from, with Pakistan's economy badly needing support and US aiming to withdraw the bulk of its troops from Afghanistan come 2014. With this news, there are expectations, of course. Can the ties be what they were before tensions emerged? Also, China is wary. India, too, has been watching developments closely. Joining me to discuss all of this week and to shed light on our top stories, Professor Anuradha Chenoy from the School of International Studies, JNU. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us. But before that, take a look at this report that I've compiled for you.
The United States and Pakistan agreed to re-establish a full partnership, hoping to end years of acrimony. The two sides would now resume their ministerial-level strategic dialogue, frozen since the killing of bin Laden.
I'm pleased to announce that today, very quickly, we were able to agree to a resumption of the strategic dialogue in order to foster deeper, broader, and more comprehensive partnership between our countries. And this revitalized dialogue will address in a realistic fashion all of the many key issues between us, from border management to counterterrorism to promoting US private investment and to Pakistan's own journey to economic revitalization.
Both sides are keen to put behind past tensions and start afresh. A shift in priorities, they hope, is possible with a new government in Pakistan and a new Secretary of State in the United States. But continued US drone strikes against militants in Pakistan's northwest remain a big hurdle.
We have registered our concern and will continue to do so. That drone attacks are counterproductive in terms of our relationship and also so in the light of today's discussion, we'll continue this dialogue on how to stop this policy of drone attacks as far as US is concerned.
As for Afghanistan, Aziz and Kerry both expressed hopes to revive deadlocked talks with the Afghan Taliban as part of broader efforts to stabilize the nation as US-led forces prepare to pull out most combat troops by late 2014.
The United States is drawing down, not withdrawing. There's a distinction. The President will announce the number of forces that he will commit for the United States, and other countries have already committed certain numbers of forces who will remain in Afghanistan for two purposes. One, counterterrorism, and two, to train, equip, and advise the armed forces.
Kerry's two-day visit in the Pakistani capital highlighted civilian cooperation on development, education and energy issues. But the military and counter-terrorism relationship with nuclear-armed Pakistan are the crux of US interests here and the source of the most friction in a difficult and distrustful relationship that has carried from crisis to crisis for years.
All right, Professor Chinoy, let me start by asking you, they say time is the best healer. Do you think this time gap between, when they stop talking to now when the talks are going to get resumed is good enough? Do you see positive developments happening with Kerry as the new Secretary of State and the new government in Pakistan?
Definitely things do seem to be improving, but I would argue that the talks never stopped. The only thing was that Pakistan had to show some overt anger because their sovereignty was continuously eroded when Osama bin Laden, they attacked and killed Osama bin Laden without asking Pakistan army. There have been 370 drone attacks in Pakistan territory, in the northwest, SWAT regions. And there's popular resentment in Pakistan amongst the people on these drone attacks. So this soured the relations somewhat because they kept asking, but at the same time they kept allowing. Yeah. After all, 370 drone attacks have taken place. This year they have decreased, but they have targeted both militants as well as civilian killings. Right. Hundreds and thousands of civilians have also been killed. And so now with the Nawaz Sharif government coming in, they're hoping to revive relations with the US in a larger perspective, especially I think when US withdraws or draws down its troops from Afghanistan, as Kerry just said,
right.
I think the US will need Pakistan as its most major partner in Afghanistan.
Right. Also, do you think the US this time is seeming to have adopted a more milder approach to issues like drone strikes and terrorism? That's, do you think, a big positive?
Well, it may be a positive for the United States because it means essentially that they're going in for a power sharing deal with the Taliban and with Pakistan, because Nawaz Sharif also represents pretty hardline elements in Pakistan. But it's not such good news for India because it means that to withdraw from Afghanistan, and if they leave just about 20,000 troops, let's say NATO ISAF forces in Afghanistan, those troops will be very vulnerable unless they have a deal with the Taliban. You don't attack us, we won't attack you. Which means that, as Karzai has been saying, that you're having a compromise with the Taliban and making the Karzai government shaky. But what the US is trying is to balance all, and they be the mediating balancer between Karzai and the Taliban, between Pakistan and the Taliban, between Pakistan and India. And so they send Joe Biden here, they send Kerry there. They try to keep both apart, but India's interests are not being considered in their Afghan withdrawal.
Right. Also, many would argue that, this the way the US talks are going on with the Taliban and how Hamid Karzai was angered a few weeks back, that is not a very good situation for the US right now. And it's just mere eyewash, the US's effort to talk peace with the Taliban. Many also say that. But you talked about India's concerns. Let's also talk a bit about India and China combined, how they look at this peace effort by the US towards Pakistan. China seems to be very wary.
Well, China is also very interested because they also have a lot of economic strategic linkages with both the US and with Pakistan. But they also have a fear of terrorism and secessionism in their Xinjiang provinces. And if the Taliban improves its position in either in the southwest of Afghanistan or in Pakistan itself, the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, then they're also at risk. But China is a long-standing partner of Pakistan, and they understand Pakistan's interest in the US. In fact, Pakistan has always played an important role in linking China with the US.
Yeah.
So India's fear again is that it can get strategically isolated with China, Pakistan,
and US.
US kind of closer tie-up. But even though the world has changed and there's no Cold War, and India is trying to improve its relations, I think the only way out is for India also to improve its relations, not with just with one or the other, but with all three combined. And also see that all three are also playing games against India. They can't just have either India US or India, Pakistan, but they have to play with all three.
Right, the balancing act, what Kerry seems to be doing quite perfectly these days. Let's wait and watch as to how things change, because this is a very dynamic situation that we see with John Kerry first visiting India, then Biden, and now Kerry in Pakistan. Thank you so much, Professor Chenoy, for joining me and sharing your thoughts with me on World Panorama. With that, let's get you other world stories. Egypt's military-backed government instructed its security forces to end sit-ins by tens of thousands of supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi, a decree that many feared could lead to a new round of violent confrontations. EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton flew out empty-handed after 3 days of talks aimed at finding a common ground between the army-installed interim government and supporters of Morsi. Have a look.
Thousands of supporters of ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi have defied a new warning from the military-backed cabinet as they continue their sit-ins in the capital, Cairo.
وعلى السلم الاجتماعي وأمان المواطنين فقد قرر مجلس الوزراء البدء في اتخاذ كافة الإجراءات اللازمة لمواجهة هذه المخاطر ووضع نهاية لها مع تكليف السيد وزير الداخلية باتخاذ كل ما يلزم في هذا الشأن في إطار أحكام الدستور.
The Brotherhood says its supporters will stay put until Morsi is reinstated. At least 80 of them were shot dead by security forces at dawn last Saturday.
الأصل أن يقال للقاتل للإرهابي للمجرم للسفاح للجزار يجب عليك أن تتوقف عن القتل، لا أن يقال للمعتصمين السلميين لماذا لا تعودوا إلى بيوتكم وتؤثروا السلامة.
Earlier, after meeting Morsi in a secret location, the European Union's Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton said mediation efforts would continue and that she would return.
Only an inclusive process will work, and though I recognise that is challenging, it is really important to begin now.
She met with Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Interim President Adli Mansour and Vice President Mohammed al-Bardai, as well as the pro-Morsi coalition. But in the wake of the talks, neither side appear to have shifted their positions, with al-Bardai insisting Morsi would have no political role and his supporters continuing to demand his reinstatement.
After the 30th of June and after the uprising of the 30th of June, it was clear that there is a new phase. There was a correction of the revolution of the 21st of January. I think there is a new roadmap. Mr. Morsi failed, but the Brotherhood very much continued to be part of the political process, and we would like them to continue to be part of the political process.
The overwhelming majority of the protesters echo the demands of the Brotherhood leaders. Reinstate Morsi, reverse all measures taken by the military, including the suspension of the disputed constitution and the disbanding of the Islamist-controlled legislature. Only if these demands are met, they insist, would they halt the 2 Cairo sit-ins and the demonstrations which has attracted crowds of up to 20,000.
A short break now. I'll be back with more world news. Also, a look at the elections in Zimbabwe. Vote chaos plunges Zimbabwe back into crisis. Stay tuned to know more. You're watching World Panorama. Before the official results are even announced and before the legal challenges are even drafted, the fight now begins for the control of the narrative of the true story of what just happened to the Zimbabwean democracy. The largest group of election observers described the vote as seriously compromised and said up to 1 million Zimbabweans were prevented from voting. The commission said vote counting at polling stations had been completed on Thursday and results were now being collated.
President Robert Mugabe's party on Thursday claimed a landslide victory in Zimbabwe's elections. But its rival, Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai's Movement for Democratic Change, alleged that there had been monumental fraud.
Our conclusion has been that this has been a huge farce. The credibility of this election has been marred by administrative and legal violations which affect the legitimacy of its outcome. The election does not meet SADC guidelines. It is a sham election that does not reflect the will of the people.
Within hours of this statement from the Prime Minister, riot police were deployed outside the headquarters of Zimbabwe's main opposition party, MDC. Zimbabwe's leading domestic election monitoring agency, which fielded 7,000 observers, cried foul over the July 31st presidential elections.
Generally, the environment was relatively calm and peaceful. Based on the empirical reports from our observers, regardless of the outcome, the credibility of the 2013 harmonized elections is seriously compromised by a systematic effort to disenfranchise urban voters up to 1 million voters.
Zimbabweans voted in large numbers on 31st July in a fiercely contested election pitting veteran President Robert Mugabe against Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai, who has vowed to push Africa's oldest leader into retirement after 33 years in power. With no reliable opinion polls and amid allegations of vote rigging, it is hard to say whether Tsvangirai will succeed in his third attempt to oust 89-year-old Mugabe, who has run the southern African nation since independence from Britain in 1980.
Israeli and Palestinian negotiators held their first peace talks in nearly 3 years, starting July 29th in a US-procured effort that Secretary of State John Kerry hopes will end their conflict despite deep divisions. The talks will be conducted by senior aides to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's Justice Minister Tzipi Livni and Yitzhak Molko. The Palestinian side is being represented by Saib Erekat and Mohammad Ishtier. With a cast of characters that has presided over numerous failed Middle East peace efforts, the Obama administration launched a fresh bid to pull Israel and the Palestinians into substantive negotiations.
A viable two-state solution is the only way this conflict can end, and there is not much time to achieve it, and there is no other alternative. We all need to be strong in our belief in the possibility of peace, courageous enough to follow through on our faith in it, and audacious enough to achieve what these two peoples have so long aspired to and deserve.
Kerry, who has prodded, coaxed and cajoled the two sides to resume negotiations in a flurry of visits to the Middle East during his less than 6 months in office, has urged Israelis and Palestinians to strike reasonable compromises.
I'm delighted that all final status issues are on the table and will be resolved without any exceptions. And it's time for the Palestinian people to have an independent, sovereign state of their own.
You know, Saib, we all spent some time in the negotiations room. We didn't reach that end in the past, but we didn't complete our mission. And this is something that we need to do now in these negotiations that we relaunch today. A new opportunity has been created for us, for all of us, and we cannot afford to waste it.
The sticking points are the familiar ones: security, borders, the right of return for Palestinian refugees since 1948, the status of Jerusalem, and formal Palestinian recognition of the Jewish state. The United States is seeking to broker an agreement on a two-state solution in which Israel would exist peacefully alongside a new Palestinian state created in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, lands occupied by the Israelis since a 1967 war. The last direct talks collapsed in late 2010 over Israel's building of Jewish settlements in the West Bank. A look at Globe Watch now, other international news compiled for you in a quick wrap.
A Bangladeshi court on 1st August declared the country's main Islamic party, Jamaat-e-Islam, illegal, effectively banning it from national elections due to be held early next year. The ruling immediately triggered violent protests by party supporters. The verdict was welcomed by several anti-Jamaat supporters who gathered outside the court and hailed the judgment. Jamaat immediately appealed to the Supreme Court against the High Court verdict. The party would be barred from contesting elections if the Supreme Court upholds the verdict. National Security Agency leaker Edward Snowden left transit zone of a Moscow airport and entered Russia after authorities granted him temporary asylum. The US has demanded that Russia send Snowden home to face prosecution for espionage, but Prime Minister Vladimir Putin dismissed the request. Putin said that Snowden could receive asylum in Russia on condition he stops leaking US secrets. The White House signaled that President Barack Obama may boycott a September summit with President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. According to his social media page, Syrian Prime Minister Bashar al-Assad met members of the security forces in the town of Daraya, southwest of Damascus, on Thursday. The army targeted Daraya with artillery after rebels moved into this area last year. A huge blast hit a weapon depot in Syrian city of Homs on Thursday. Videos show an explosion, followed by a plume of smoke rising hundreds of feet into the air. The explosion killed at least 22 people, including civilians. According to preliminary presidential election results in Mali, former Prime Minister Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta holds a comfortable lead and could win an outright first-round victory. Keïta's rivals immediately rejected the partial result, calling for the Minister of Territorial Administration to resign and an international commission to be established to tally the votes. The competitors believe the election must go to the second round, while observer missions have hailed the peaceful voting. Tensions appear to rise as the announcement of official results are approaching. The vote counting is expected to be completed on Wednesday. Italy's Supreme Court on Thursday upheld a jail sentence against former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi for tax fraud in a devastating blow to the former Prime Minister that can throw the country's fragile coalition government into crisis. But the top judges ordered a judicial review by a Milan court of the second part of his sentence, a 5-year ban from public office. This will enable him to remain as a senator and as leader of his centre-right People of Freedom Party for the moment.
Shifting gears, time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed through this week. Here's all the sports action.
The Indian Formula One Grand Prix will be dropped from next year's calendar, with organisers targeting a return in 2015. Formula One Supremo Bernie Ecclestone said in a statement, the Indian Grand Prix was likely to be dropped from next year's calendar as Russia prepared for its debut. Ecclestone is due to present the 2014 calendar to the governing International Automobile Federation for approval in September, with teams reluctant to go to more than 20 races. Tottenham Hotspur have reached an agreement with Valencia for striker Roberto Soldado and will pay the player's buyout clause of €30 million. The striker is set to arrive at London to complete his medical and will sign a 4-year deal with the club. Andres Villas-Boas has been looking for a striker this summer after Emmanuel Adebayor and Jermaine Defoe struggled in front of goals last season, managing only 23 goals in 77 appearances combined. Spanish international Roberto Soldado will add much-needed firepower to the strike force as Spurs look to qualify for the Champions League in the upcoming season. American teenager Katie Ledecky broke the women's 1500-meter freestyle record by an astonishing 6.01 seconds as she won gold in 15 minutes 36.53 seconds at the 15th FINA World Championship in Barcelona. The 16-year-old just beat out defending champion Lotte Friis, who led for most of the race but could do little as Ledecky parred to the front on the final 100-meter. Melbourne will host the day-night final of the 2015 Cricket World Cup at the MCG on March 29. The semi-finals for the tournament, to be co-hosted by Australia and New Zealand, will be played at Auckland's Eden Park on March 24th and at the Sydney Cricket Ground on March 26th. The tournament, which features 49 matches over 44 days with 26 games in Australia, opens with a clash between New Zealand and Sri Lanka on February 14th in Christchurch.
Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap. US magazine Vanity Fair is chronicling Princess Diana's 2-year relationship with Pakistani heart surgeon Hasnat Khan. The Pakistani heart surgeon dated Diana between 1995 and 97. The article claims that she wanted to marry the doctor and considered moving to Pakistan. According to the piece, Hasnat's conservative family as well as his distaste for the spotlight sabotaged their relationship. The fanfare surrounding the birth of the royal baby has hit the comic book industry. Blue Water Productions is set to release a special edition of its Royals Kate and William series that celebrates the birth of the new prince. The 32-page glossy chronicles the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's lives before they became a couple, leading up to the birth of their son, George Alexander Louis. A sculpture of Venezuela's former leader Hugo Chavez, made by a self-taught family of wax figurine artists, will soon be unveiled at the Wax Museum of Cuba, located in the eastern city of Bayamo. Rafael Barrios and his two sons, Rafael and Leander, are currently working on the wax statue of Chavez, who died in March at the age of 58 after a 2-year battle with cancer. Leander Barrios said they decided to pay homage to the late leader with this sculpture. Bollywood superstars Shah Rukh Khan and Deepika Padukone visited a cinema in a suburban area of London to promote their new movie Chennai Express. Hundreds of screaming fans turned out at the multiplex in Feltham, West London to welcome the famous pair, who rewarded their patience by signing autographs, posing for photos and performing a dance from the movie. The comic caper, co-starring Deepika Padukone and directed by Rohit Shetty, will hit cinemas around the world to coincide with Eid next Friday. That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This week, I close the show with a thought-provoking photo exhibition in Dhaka, organized by a nationalist forum for resurgence of Bangladesh people, which depicts the saga of the country's freedom struggle of 1971. This is Meisana Khan signing off.